opposite.
Well, let's look at the first story. Is the friction between the people of the land and the returnees. In 4, this is just snarky, I think is what happens, where the people of the land have been living there. They're looking at the horizon. They see all these people coming back out of exile, and I don't know what they must have been feeling, but if they were hopeful, they weren't hopeful for very long, because the exiles who come back are nasty, and they have the idea that they know what's right, they know what's true.
Are super arrogant.
They're very arrogant. And so the people of the land are kind of duplicitous, and they end up writing a letter. And they write a letter to the leader of Persia, and it's a snarky letter saying, you know, if you allow the temple to be built, because all these exiles want to build this temple, if you allow that temple to be built, they are going to be worshiping their God, and they will not be acknowledging and worshiping you. And that has the desired effect, and so that initially the building of the temple was stopped, certainly put on hold, and you know, I'm sympathetic to the people of the land.
Of course, yeah, they're taking your house or your homes, and.
But I would also say we shouldn't triangulate, and it would have been better for the people of the land.
It would have been nice if they
could have
had a peaceful conflict mediation.
Kumbaya moment. But we did not do that. We went through the courts, and then you get kind of a letter genre that's stuck in the middle there, where you actually get the actual letter that's sent and the letter back, and so that's also kind of an interesting way to tell the story. Is instead of just telling it like a straight history, they tell it through these letters, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So that gives you this sense of the friction. It's not just the enemies from without, and there are plenty of enemies who are looking for opportunity to attack, but it's also that within the Jewish community itself, it is struggling to figure out who it is and who it's going to be in the days ahead. So it's a book about identity, very much.
Yeah, especially once you have the splitting occur. Yes. Because before, you really had one group that kept falling away.
Yeah.
You know, that there weren't fractions really within the group. And here you have two groups that I think within their own minds have really legitimate claims. You know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Which is interesting. Okay. So the second story that we're going to look at is the rebuilding of the temple. So the second temple is complete. This is in chapter 6. And Ezra's kind of leading the inauguration of the temple. I would say, like the ribbon cutting ceremony.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
golden shovel.
The groundbreaking. Sorry, we're laughing at our own jokes.
We are. Yeah.
And this is an interesting part because because in it, they rededicate themselves to the law of Moses, and that's interesting. On like themes between Chronicles versus Esther, or sorry, Ezra, is what origin stories they go back to, and in Ezra you see this going back to Moses, whereas in Chronicles you see more of going back to Jacob as the patriarch.
Oh, interesting.
And like the defining moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting, huh?
The stories that you tell and remember.
The stories that you tell, you pick different ones for different purposes. Yeah. And I think that also goes back to this idea of reconquering the promised land.
Yeah.
That the people who are coming back from exile have it in their, kind of have the attitudes of, this is our promised land and we're going into it. Like, and so it's a more subtle theme in this one. Like, they're not as explicit about it as in, let's say, Joshua. But I think that's in the background and why they're choosing Moses as their kind of
It reminds me kind of Eddie Izzard, who's a British comedian, has this moment where he's describing the pilgrims who are coming into America, and they're saying, here we are in a land that is purely ours, we can worship our God, and there's no one else here. Pardon me, who are you, the Indian? Oh, never mind. We can do... what's all this? You know, the feathers. And they're entirely uninterested in the Indians until that first winter comes. And,
Yes.
oh, pardon me. We have some of your food and, you know, Thanksgiving and all that. It is. That's friction of coming back. And there are people in your land.
Yeah.
How dare they?
How dare they?
Yeah.
And it's not a totally foreign people.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of your second cousins
Mm-hmm.
that are there. So you can't just slaughter them the same way.
Yeah.
The same way they did in the initial conquest. That's a touchy subject that we didn't really go into.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll go into it on a second go around of Joshua.
So any more on the second temple?
They re-celebrated Passover.
Yeah.
So again, that harkening back to kind of the Mosaic time period versus the Abrahamic Jacob time period. Yeah.
Cool.
Interesting, huh?
It is interesting. The last thing in 6 is probably the most disturbing and hard for people like us to get our heads around. But it's Ezra's edict against intermarriage. And what he came back to was the people of the land who, by need, had to figure out how to live with the people around them, and so they would intermarry with folks that did not carry Jewish traditions. And boy, he draws the line as clearly as he possibly can and says, look, this is against the law, and we're not going to do it, and we're going to expel the wives that you have.
And the kids.
And the children. You know, this is an area where, like you were saying, with the text being descriptive and prescriptive, meaning, you know, you should do this, or versus this is just what happened. This is, I think, a very descriptive moment where I'm glad we have this as part of our history, because the religious impulse, I think, when we're under stress, is not always positive.
Right.
Rather than God leading us to be welcoming and loving towards people, it can lead us to be nasty and judgmental. And I think that's what you see. You know, Ezra, best of intentions, he wants to rebuild this people.
Yeah, and you get why he's doing it.
I can understand, yeah.
But you shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Well, this amazing amount of pain,
Yeah.
you know, is caused, and it makes you wonder, do the ends of this, you know, justify the means? And then when you look at other views of the outsiders, like in Jonah, you know that there were other people who were living at that time who said, you know, this is not who we are as a people. That sometimes the most faithful followers of God are actually not Jewish, but are the outsiders. And really, with someone like Cyrus, the Persian leader who initiates all this, you'd think they'd remember that. But we forget these things, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, we do. And I think that's Ezra.
I think that's Ezra. We'll come back to you with Nehemiah, which is just kind of another version, or adds a little bit to this history in this time period. So we'll see you then.